Hello and welcome to Supervision Smörgåsbord, a podcast full of tips, tricks, and interviews with experts to help you enjoy being a supervisor. Here's your host, Dr. Tara Sanderson.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we are talking with Jamie Watson again. This is an episode 2. I'm so excited that you're back with us. I'm going to read your little bio just for the folks who maybe didn't hear podcast 1. Jamie is a licensed marriage and family therapist in Oregon and Washington, and the mental health therapy director at Neurotherapeutic Pediatric Therapies in Portland and surrounding areas. At the University of Western States, Jamie teaches play therapy, pre-practicum, and human growth development in the Graduate Department of Counseling. Jamie is also a registered play therapist supervisor and is recognized by the Oregon Board of Licensed Professional Counselors and Therapists, the Washington Department of Health, and the AAMFT American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists as an approved clinical supervisor. She also has additional training in foster and adoptive family therapy, parent-child interactive therapy, and trauma-focused CBT, specializing in child attachment and trauma. Jamie currently serves as the president of the Oregon Association of Play Therapy and has been involved with the board and ORAPT in some capacity for over a decade. Jamie lives in Clackamas, Oregon, with her 2 young boys, husband, and Golden Doodle, her therapy dog. Welcome back, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me again. I feel so honored.
Well, you know that we start with a random question each time. And
Yes.
today, your random question is, if you could design a postage stamp, what
Oh
would
my
you
gosh.
create?
Oh my goodness. That is a really good question. I'm looking out my backyard right now, and there is a beautiful cherry blossom tree, and it just makes me think of like nature. So I probably would do a postage stamp. And I really love this is a hard question. I really love like superheroes. When you started talking about that, I started thinking, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be really fun to have like a superhero stamp, which I know that there's like DC comic stamps out there and
Sure.
like other, right? So maybe I would have like a superhero on a cherry blossom tree saying like happy spring or something like that.
So you could have a little seasonal series of them. That would be
Yes.
so cute.
Wouldn't that be fun? And
Like
my
the
kids are
mix of
really,
the nature plus superhero kind of piece. I
yes.
love that.
Wouldn't that be fun? My kids are also into, like, the Minions right now, so maybe I would do, like I would do a Minion superhero.
Yes.
A Minion superhero seasonal stamp.
I love it. That
Oh my
would
gosh,
be
that's so much
so
fun.
fun.
I'm gonna
That would
contact
be
the United
ridiculous.
States Postal Service today.
Please do. Please do.
Okay.
Turn that in,
So
turn your submission in today. Get that
got it.
registered and going. Yes, that would be amazing. I would buy that for sure.
Okay, cool.
For sure.
Good. I have
I am
one
currently
person.
regularly buying the Dungeons and Dragons stamps and using them absolutely
Yes!
everywhere on
I
everything.
love that. I love that.
I
I
think
love
it
that.
is just so ridiculously fun and way more
So
exciting
fun.
than doing just like flags or whatever boring
Yes,
thing is out there
yeah.
right now.
You know, it's funny, I buy seasonal stamps and then it's like I have just an like, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 stamps left from like little booklet. And it's like, well, I can't use Christmas stamps in April. And I'm like, but what? Why not? Like,
But you
like
can,
let's just do
for
it. You
sure.
can. And I'm like, but I'm like hoarding them. I'm like saving them for next Christmas or like saving them for next spring or whatever. And
Yeah.
so I guess knowing that, maybe I wouldn't do a seasonal stamp because then you, in my mind, maybe you would only have, anyway, I got to give this more thought, more
Yeah.
serious thought.
Clearly it is
Yes.
time to work on our stamp stuff
Yes.
as
Yeah.
in our world.
I
Oh, well,
love it.
I'm excited to just kind of continue our conversation from last time, but also just explore into some
Yeah.
other territories. We were going to jump
Yeah.
into talking about AAMFT supervision.
Yeah.
I would love to know. I know that you got your ACS. That is a big thing in some of the circles that I'm in right now. So I work with some LCSW folks, and I think that she is an LPC, whatever that version is on the East Coast. And on the East
Hmm.
Coast, I feel like ACS is like everybody has it, everybody's talking about it, everybody does stuff with getting your approved clinical supervisor status.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about specifically for the AAMFT
Yeah.
supervision component of it, what makes that supervision like learning and training and growing kind of
Yeah.
different than other trainings?
Yeah, yeah. So, interestingly enough, when I became licensed, my supervisor at the time, who was also an AMFT approved supervisor, was like, Jamie, you need to be a supervisor. Like, you're in it. Like, it makes sense. You're good at it. Let's do it. And so, in the state of Oregon, you need to take the 30-hour CEs to become a supervisor. And then you have like 6 hours of supervision and, getting doing supervision with your students or associates or whatever, but I didn't realize that there was a difference. And so when he was
Mm.
like, okay, well, you have to go to the AMFT, take their course, do all of that stuff, and then we'll do supervision of supervision, which is 36 hours, on top of I think it's like 150 clinical hours with
Wow.
no less than two supervisees. Like, the requirements to become an approved supervisor for AMFT are significantly
Yeah.
more than what they require in Oregon and especially in Washington. However, Washington, if you have your AMFT approved supervisor credentials, you're good to go. So, so I took the course, and what it is it's like a two-pronged didactic experience where you're doing homework, and it's this 6-month course thing. It's like a huge thing. You write basically a supervision thesis, and you have to have it approved by multiple people. Like, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
And so I did it thinking that was like what you had to do to become a supervisor. But the main part about it is that you have to prove that you are systemic in thinking. And so you are systemic in basically everything that you do, eat, breathe, and sleep systemically. Um, and as a supervisor, supervising a supervisor, or what they call mentoring now, that supervisor. Or potential supervisor needs to prove to me as the approved AMFT supervisor that they think systemically and that everything they do is
Mm.
systemically and that they support all of their supervisees in a systemic way. And so when they're sitting with their supervisees, even if it's an LPC associate or equivalent, like, they have to show that they are sitting with their clients and thinking systemically 100% of the time. And so that comes back to me as the AMFT as supervisor or supervisor of supervision, to make sure that everybody is thinking and aligned with systemic thought. So it's not
Wow.
just an individual coming in for services, it's an individual who has an array of supports outside of just their individual person and an array of influences, et cetera. And we have to consider those systems when working with that client.
Yeah. Well, and what I love about that, like I'm a big fan of anything I can get a certificate or a gold star in anyway as a
Same.
human.
Mhm. Uh-huh.
So some extra letters after my name, I'm in. What do I need to
Mhm.
do? So I'm a
Mhm.
sucker for process like that. But I'm also what I'm listening to in that that is, is that it's putting the onus on the supervisor to to own their role in a way that it kind of ebbs out of them in all conversations, in all looking at
Mhm.
the supervisee's clients, in the way that they're conceptualizing things. And it's so much wrapped up as a part of their whole experience
Mhm.
that the supervisee is seeing that modeled for them in a way
Oh,
that is,
absolutely.
yeah, just so much
Yeah.
lived and
Mhm.
not a hat that I put on, because I think about sometimes in my day where I've got, some admin stuff I'm doing in the morning. I see a client, I switch to being a supervisor for an hour, and then I switch back to a client, and then I do some more admin stuff in the afternoon, like where
Uh-huh.
I'm just like popping hats on all day long. And when I pop on my supervision hat, like the first things that come to mind for me as a supervisor are like risk, like what's going on with
Mhm.
your clients, what risks are out there that are going to impact you or impact us as a business. What are we thinking about inside of the professional development of my person? And I'm going
Mhm.
down my little checklist with my supervisor hat on. But this model being separate from do 30 hours in training and like here's six
Mhm.
supervision of your
Yep.
supervision kind of hours, this
Mhm.
model of like dig deep into who you
Mhm.
are as a
Hmm.
supervisor and then
Yep.
live that piece just feels
Yep.
wildly different.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. And the fact that like so you're doing the course, you're living through this like 6-month process and actually it's like an 18-month minimum process where you're educating yourself, as a supervisor are learning that lived experience through, having to write the paper, this foundation of supervision, like where are you in this idea of being a supervisor and how do you bring yourself into that piece, but also systemically considering your stuff, also considering your supervisee's stuff, which is pretty across the board, I think. But having to do all of that extra work really puts into perspective where you are as the supervisor in the world of this supervisee, which I think is just great. Like when I have been contacted to do supervision for somebody for the state of Oregon, let's say, and they're like, yeah, I only need 6. My mind is blown. I feel like if you're supervising somebody if you're if you're a supervisor of a therapist and you're only required to have 6 hours of supervision, but you're responsible for and have liability for your supervisee's clients and the welfare of those clients. Personally, I would want more than 6 supervision hours, and more experience just because I would feel nervous being unsupported, outside of those 6 hours. So the fact that I had 36 hours, I felt largely supported. I felt like I could really process who I was as a supervisor and give to my supervisees. Like I learned how to fill my cup as a supervisor in order to give to my supervisees. I processed cultural stuff. I processed how to support my supervisees in the best way possible, and also like dividing the difference between like this isn't therapy, it's supervision, but there are definitely aspects of being a supervisor and a therapist that like really commingle. And how do I like balance that and draw a line when it becomes more like therapy than like all of these things are questions that you should
Mhm.
be asking as a supervisee or supervisor in training, but really 6 hours is not enough time to do all of that stuff. And so I yeah, that's like the difference in is just this really supportive, systemically thinking, um, educational and experiential training of a supervisor, while thinking systemically. I mean, like that's like the bottom line.
Yeah.
But I really do appreciate the AMFT's approach, to all of that, and it's just so. Um, it is really cool to have that
Yeah.
after my name, right? The AMFT
Yeah.
approved supervisor. And then, on top of that, like when I encourage licensed clinicians to become supervisor, just because, you can just tell they're going to be a good supervisor. My gut is to send them to the AMFT and do that because for the reasons I already
Yeah.
stated, it just seems more, it just seems, I don't know, better. I don't want to put labels like that on that, but that's really where my brain is at.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things that I heard in that was like, I think about supervision training in kind of layers. There's the base
Mhm.
layer of like, if you do nothing else in your supervision time with your supervisee, please cover these things,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there's this like next layer of like, how do you help that supervisee develop, right? And then there's this
Right.
following layer that like when you do 36 hours of supervised supervision, you get
Mhm.
the chance to get to that third layer, which is all about, okay, let's dig into you more, right? Let's
Mhm.
like make
Mhm.
sure that you're doing your work in this too and that you're able to like really get to process all of those pieces, because I think that the
Yeah.
6 hours of supervision really just kind of covers those basics of
Yeah.
like just make sure you're not like doing
Yeah.
anything terrible. And
Yeah.
then we get to these other points, and unfortunately I feel like, as is the world inside of therapy, because we are a medical model most of the time, like
Oh,
what would
yeah.
be better would be to flip that whole thing, right? And
Oh,
go
yeah.
deep into who we are and make sure that we're a good fit for supervision before we then start doing these, like, how do
Yeah.
you be a teacher? How do you be a mentor? How do you do these pieces?
Yes.
And then we can say, okay, now that you've got those frameworks, here's how you make sure that they're not screwing up their clients. Like, here's the
Right.
like risk questions
Right.
and these things. But typically we have that flipped because it's all about, risk management or all about
Yeah.
symptom reduction, all about those kinds of things. And then if we have time, yeah, you should work on yourself too, right?
Right. Right. Well, and that's a really interesting perspective too, because you start thinking about like they take supervisees immediately. Whereas
Mhm.
like if they did flip that, it would make so much more sense to have that process of like the first 30 hours doing all of that work. And then the next 6 hours talking about like here's how you don't screw up your supervisee and how you will, you limit your liability, et cetera, et cetera. Now you can take
Yeah.
supervisees like
Yeah.
or even like halfway through or something like that. But like yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous that they're just kind of like, Yes, we trust you." And I
Yeah.
mean, how many times have you had a supervisor be like, "Ugh, I had this supervisor who was awful, and I didn't feel A, B, or C comfortable or whatever within supervision, and I didn't learn anything, or I always felt shamed or whatever." And it's like, "Yep." Uh,
Yeah.
like, I feel like that was probably a 6-hour supervision of supervision situation. And,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, no, that's a really good perspective. I think that that would be so much more beneficial to everybody across the board
Yes.
as clinicians.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who do we write?
Right. How do
Who
we
do we
redo the
tell?
system? Let's redo the system. I chatted with somebody on a podcast. I'll try and figure out who it is and link it in the show notes later. But she had just completed her doctorate in supervision. And
Oh,
there's a school out here on the West Coast that does a supervision doctorate. And like, there is a little part of my soul that if student loans weren't a big deal, like I would absolutely go
sure.
back for that because I am
Yes.
so interested in like, what's the curriculum here? Because I
Yeah.
do think that we as supervisors don't get the training in a lot of things. Like, how do we teach somebody to build competency in this area?
Mhm.
Like, how do we
Mhm.
instill in them this is how we do this? Which
Yeah.
requires us to have some skills in teaching that
Yeah.
we don't learn in grad school, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not a part of our whole grad school experience is how do we
No.
learn how to teach someone something because it's not an
Yeah.
innate trait in a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
Or we think about things like how do we do conflict management? Like there are many skills in conflict management that we can
Oh, yeah.
absolutely teach our clients, but may not have dealt within ourselves in order to teach our supervisees how to manage that,
Yeah.
especially if they're doing couples work or family work or navigating things
Mhm.
within relationship dynamics, right? That
Mhm.
those kind of areas, if we haven't given ourselves permission to learn about them in other ways, we really struggle with being able to
Yeah.
teach them to our supervisees and help them manage that piece of it. I think about a
Right.
supervisor situation that I got to do some consultation on where the supervisor was like, okay, I have this person for 3 years while they're getting licensed here in Oregon, and we're at year one, and I feel like I've taught them everything I can possibly teach them. So every supervision session feels pained because it's like,
Oh,
what else do we talk about? And I was
right.
like, oh, there's
Yeah.
so many
So
things to talk
much.
about. Like,
So
let's
much.
work together. So I worked with that supervisor to come up with a kind of a developmental plan over 3 years and go, a supervision by supervision if there's not something huge going on for that clinician, here's kind of what you want to be building at each stage and
Mhm.
building this developmental model for yourself to just say, okay, if they come in and they're like, all my clients are doing fine, like I don't really have a presentation to give to you, like I don't have any questions, which sometimes happens, then you can
Mhm.
pull out your developmental model and say, well, where did we leave off in these things that I want you to walk out of here with?
Right.
Over the
Right.
course of your time with me.
Yeah.
And start picking up in those spaces. Sometimes it's simple things like, I want to just introduce you to a new orientation, or we're going to take one of your clients and pretend that we
Yes.
do Jungian work instead of
Yeah.
CBT. And let's
Yeah.
just play around with that and see what that feels like for us and like
Yes.
explore in this way instead
I
of
love
this
that.
is just what I'm doing, and how it gets done. And now we're done with our session today, right?
Right? And I don't think that they talk about that in a 30-hour course either. Like, I don't remember any of that stuff being talked. I mean, the great thing about the AMFT course versus like a state course is that we review code of ethics across the board, but mostly for the AMFT, but also like that's like the majority of the course is like how to supervise, knowing the code of ethics and how to like process ethical dilemmas and um but it doesn't really go into like how do we support theoretical orientation, how do we support this, how do we support
Mhm.
that. And the other thing is too that I was thinking like there are levels of readiness for therapists, right? And once you get to like the end of their 3 years or 2 years, what have you, you start to become more peers, right? So like they've learned so much from you and so much from the experience that now they're like, oh, I don't really have anything to say because like I'm at the end of this and I feel really ready to like spread my wings, etc. And it's like, okay, well at this point, like yes, you're closer to being my peer than anything. And like there's something to be said about like what could we learn about other code of ethics, or what could we do, like just that
Mhm.
developmental like program that you had the supervisor kind of enlist with their supervisees, like what else could we really dig into at this point, or like have you make sure that you're ready, really solidly ready to kind of graduate and become licensed or what have you. It's just so interesting that those things are just not discussed, and those 30 hours are really, really, honed in on liability and ethical dilemmas, which is great. Don't get me
Yep.
wrong. And there should just be more to it than that for
Mhm.
anybody across the board in supervision.
Yeah. I think the mirroring I see in what we learn in grad school, right? Like in grad school, your first like, I don't know, 6 months to a year is all about how do you sit in a room with a person and do
Hmm.
like, person-centered therapy with them. And like
Right,
I listen, I do active listening, I repeat back to them, like all of that stuff. We spend a ton of time doing that. And then
right.
after that, we're like, okay, now what's your theoretical orientation? And we're like, what?
That's
You
a
just
really
you just
big
spent
jump.
6 months telling me
Yeah,
this is what therapy is, but now I
right.
have to do other stuff in that. But I think we do that with
Yeah,
supervision too. We go, okay, risk, ethics, like, these decision-making things. Okay, you're keeping all your clients safe. Good job.
yeah.
So now, what else are you gonna do? And our poor supervisees are
Mhm.
like, "Wait, there's more? I thought I just had
Yeah,
to make sure they were all, like, alive and
yeah,
and
yeah,
doing well. What are we
yeah,
doing here?" And I think that having that developmental picture helps so much to be able to check back in and like look and cross things off and be like, yeah, we've done some things from different orientations, or we've done some things on these levels of risk, or now we're going to really talk about what does it look like to do consultation well? How do you come prepared for
right.
consultation? How do you prepare for
Mhm.
consultations with doctors or psychiatric nurse practitioners versus just a colleague, or
Right.
and not just in a diminutive way, but just like it's just different. When I call a
Yeah.
psychiatrist at an office to talk about my client, it's a different consultation than when I call a colleague about a
Mhm,
consultation client, right?
mhm.
So how do we do that
Yeah.
well? That could be a whole set of series of talking
Oh my gosh,
about the
seriously.
differences and the things that you need to bring to the table, what questions you need to ask, how does billing work in all of that scenario, or does it? Like
That's like
all
a
of those
whole thing.
pieces, right? Right? But
Yeah,
that I feel like that's a thing that we don't pass on some of our
it's
institutional
true.
knowledge on to our supervisees. We kind of
Yeah.
expect them to just kind of work it out.
That's true. You mentioned earlier, you're like, oh, I've got so many hats. And I put, my supervisor hat on. And it's interesting because when you're in a supervision session, you have so many hats within just that session. And I think it's really important to like decipher what the hats are and how you will likely be wearing multiple hats at the exact same time, and how that feels internally. What is your like your internal monologue surrounding those hats, and what you're, because it's just a lot. It's like sitting with a client for the very first time and you're like, okay, I have to reflect, I have to listen, I have to be empathic, I have to throw in an intervention now, and I have to do, oh wait, what did they just say? Because I can't remember because I'm so busy in my brain. But you're also doing that as a supervisor. And then
Mhm.
also there's this like power dynamic between supervisor and supervisee. And when you're sitting with a supervisee, what does that power dynamic feel like? And how are you
Mhm.
processing that? Not to mention supporting your supervisee, but in an equal measure, like really supporting from like an egalitarian stance. And also, yes, I do have this power. And how do I use that power to really support this? I mean, it's just so much. And oh, by the way, you only have 6 hours of this.
Yes. Yeah. And you're done.
Yeah,
So good
and
job.
good
Go
luck.
supervise other people
Bye.
now.
Right, right. And they wonder why we have so many complaints to the board.
Yeah.
I mean, to any board, I mean, like, we have complaints all day. I mean, you can look them up and it's like ridiculous. Like, okay, I'm sorry, but I won't even go into it, but it's just like you read through these complaints and you're just like, that therapist obviously needed more supervision
Yeah.
or like whatever it might be. Maybe it was a mistake, but also like, where was the supervisor's mind in this? And where was the therapist's mind in this? And just all of it. It's just
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
And all that to say, that's how the AMFT supervision model works. And yeah, I mean, when I'm sitting with a supervisor doing supervision mentoring for AMFT, um, my mind really goes to that legal and ethical space first, just like you were mentioning earlier.
Mhm.
Like it's really important to make sure that we are, on top of that. And then it goes to, well, how are you feeling regarding that? And like,
Mhm.
I'm not gonna tell you what to do with your supervising unless I have to. But like, how did you feel supporting that person, and how are
Mhm.
you, working through that? And maybe it is like a question of I don't know, semantics, but really it comes down to supporting the supervisor in learning how to be a supervisor and
Mhm.
managing all of those things and wearing the hats and doing all of that.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I just want to echo that modeling that we do. I love that they are calling it mentoring now for the sheer fact that like
Yeah.
it really is there are some things I have to tell you that you have to do, but there's a lot of things that I get to just say, well, where do you want to go with that? And what does your training
Mhm.
say? And like what are the questions you have about this? What are the many options of things that you could do about this scenario? And
Yeah.
then what feels like the option that fits your relationship with that person or your practice policies or the ethics codes that apply here,
Yes. Mhm.
and mentoring them in that decision making process so that
Mhm.
they can start to go, oh, this is how I do this with my people. I ask these
Mhm.
questions. I don't, I think that we started doing this kind of weird division of administrative supervision versus clinical supervision in a lot of group
Right.
practices in Oregon,
Yep.
to try and like tease out like the legalities of this is what the practice says I have to do versus,
Right.
clinical stuff, which is fine. And I don't know, there's a lot of conundrums around it. But what I love about the idea of mentoring is this space where we get to say, well, let's look at all of those and figure
Mhm.
out which one, like what's the priority of how I make my decision out of knowing all of these factors. If the
Right.
company I'm working for says I have to get my notes done within this period of time, then that feels like that becomes a priority over some other things. Like, because
Right.
that's my company policy that I signed on to say I was going to follow these policies. If
Right.
ethically, like, we have a standard of like not dual relationships with our clients if they can be avoided, right? And my client wants to do this thing, they want me to come to their wedding. The company
Mm.
policy says I can. That doesn't mean I go to the wedding necessarily. It means now
Right.
I've got decisions that can be made. And how do I
Right.
reflect into those? And as a supervisor of supervision or mentoring of supervision, it becomes that place to say, well, let's lay all these out on the table and figure
Mhm.
that out together and
Mhm.
see what happens so that this supervisee can come in and go, this is how I make decisions. I lay things out on the table. I figure out the different pieces, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That makes me think of I've had a lot of mentees, and supervisors of supervision. Anyway, I've had a lot of them who have been like just licensed. And while that's fine and great, like I also feel like it's kind of like in like a marriage, like let's be married for this many years prior to having children so that we can feel what it's like to be married. Okay, well, let's be licensed as a clinician for this many years prior to being a supervisor because really like have you experienced all there is to experience as a clinician? You might be considering your practicum, your internship, what have you, and the 2 3 years or whatever that it's taken to become licensed, and that's a long time, sure. And all the while in those years, you're the learning clinician. So, like, when you graduate from being a learning clinician to a fully licensed, capable clinician on your own, independent, are you really prepared to become a supervisor? Like, that's another question is just not that I don't say like, I mean, I've definitely had supervisees who I'm like, "You're gonna be the most amazing supervisor. I'm so excited for you. Let's do it. You just became licensed. Yes." So it's not like across the board, but also I'm thinking, let's give you some space to like really feel what it's like to be a
Mm.
licensed clinician, because you're not going to be fully capable and ready to support other people becoming licensed clinicians yet. Like, it just doesn't compute in my mind to support that. And if we're only expecting them, like, you can take the 30-hour course unlicensed. And so, like, let's say you take the 30-hour course unlicensed and then you get licensed and you have your 6 hours and that's when you start super. It feels very unfathomable to me, because I know where I was at when I became licensed, and when I became a supervisor was like 2 or 3 months after that. Um, how much I've grown like
Yeah.
tremendously in the last decade as a supervisor, knowing what I know now versus what I didn't know then. I would never. Like, I look back and I'm like, oh, so many wrong
Yeah.
decisions, or like so many decisions I could have made by thinking it through a little bit more. But um, and we all have to start somewhere, but I also feel like, why can't we start after experiencing more so that we have at least more experience and more aptitude to be able to support other clinicians in that. So that's just something, that's a thought that I had when you were talking. Small
Yeah, and it
thought.
is interesting that some boards very much have that built in, like the psychologist board, you can't supervise until you've been licensed for 2 years. So we go
Mm,
through 6 years of education and, plus our undergrad and all of that. And then we have to be licensed 2 years before we can then take the course to start supervising and do that piece of it.
yeah.
Whereas LPCs and MFTs, like day you're licensed, you can start taking the course and do the other.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you could take it beforehand too, but like there's
You
a
could take
different
it. Yeah.
option, and every state's got different options in that. I do feel
Yeah.
like I love the idea of the ACS model and the AAMFT model, where it's like, here's these national standards that we'd like for you
Hmm.
to also do in addition to whatever your
Yep.
licensing board says.
Right.
Because I do think that there is something really phenomenal about taking the intentional time to get reacclimated with this thing. When I think about the course
Yeah.
in grad school that I took on supervision, it was an entire semester. I had two supervisees that I had to supervise during that semester. I had supervision of my supervision weekly. I had to tape
Hmm.
all my supervision sessions. Like, I mean,
Amazing.
it was a lot. And
That sounds
that was
great.
like my third year in grad school. So then by the time I was
Yeah.
licensed, I was like, so I know I took a lot of classes in grad school, but like,
Sure.
what was that one again? I'm not sure I remember all of what I actually learned, even though it was a
Right.
phenomenal like training experience, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
being having to then take more supervision trainings over time has been wildly helpful for me to kind of rekindle some of those pieces and reacclimate in those ways. The other
Yeah.
piece that I keep coming up with is, if people really do need to become a supervisor quickly, we have a supervisor in our practice who is Chinese and has never had a supervisor who shared her identity. And so when she got
Oh,
the opportunity to become a supervisor, she jumped on it because she
yeah,
wanted to be able to provide that for her and,
yeah,
and her culture, which I'm so in support of and I love it.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, and like my next step was, okay, we need to get you into a supervision consult group so that you are
Yeah.
constantly around people who are doing this
Yes.
work that you can ask and talk to and share with,
Yeah,
whether or not, I mean, you're going to finish your 6 hours with the board, blah blah blah, but like,
yeah.
you should be getting monthly connection with other supervisors. You need to be going to CEs regularly on this topic. You
Amen.
need to just
Yes.
like infiltrate this space, because
Yeah,
there is so much you don't know. I mean, there's so much I
yeah.
don't know, and I've been doing it for a long time, right?
Yeah, same. And let me just preface this by saying that the board does require you have to have your license for 2 years prior to being a supervisor, like an approved supervisor, but you can be supervised, you can do
Supervising.
supervised. Yes, you can be
Mhm.
supervising in the midst of that as long as you are supervised by a mentor or supervision of supervision. But yeah, I love that, and I 100% encourage all of my supervisees to join a supervision, consultation group, not just because you have that support monthly, but because it's a different perspective than mine, and I would really love
Yep,
for you. I'm not
yep,
the only person, like, what I say does not go all the time, so
yep.
please make sure that you get other perspectives. I do that for my supervisees, on top of my supervisor mentees, so it's like, Yeah, that's such a and continuation of that even after you're licensed and approved as a supervisor, like, that's just so important. I have a group of, I mean, they're my girlfriends because they're I moved to Oregon from another state, so when I moved to Oregon, I started grad school, and so all of my friends are therapists.
Yeah.
Um, and now supervisors, and so when we have our own little, like, girlfriend group, and within that girlfriend group, we kind of do our own supervision consultation, just
Yeah.
because it's, like, so easy that way, and we will text each other or call each other and be like, "I need to just run something by you," and it's, like, so nice to be
Yes.
able to do that, but it's really great to have different perspectives. I mean, none of my friends are in the same, um uh, they don't see the same demographic as I do. And so we've got my friend who specializes in couples and LGBTQ and trans stuff, and we've got my friend who specializes in adults and adolescents, and then here I am, children and neurodivergence, etc. And so we all have different perspectives, but it's so great to have that different perspective, especially when you're supervising a supervisor who's supervising therapists, seeing lots of clients. And
Yep.
the other thing is that, like, I don't think supervisors realize that this is totally off course, but I don't think supervisors realize that they're liable for all of the clients that their therapists have. And so when they come into it, they're like, I'm going to have this many supervisees. And I'm like, whoa, how many of those supervisees have full caseloads? Because you're looking at three, four, 500
Yep.
clients who you're liable for now. Do you know everything about those clients? Do you think that you'd be able to be like, "Oh, yes, we have this, complaint to the board and it's about this client," and you'd be like, "Oh, yes, I know exactly what's going on with that client."
Right.
Doubtful. So let's not take on so many, anyway, that's just
Yeah.
another piece of it. The other side too is, like, I've had a lot of a lot of interest in becoming supervisor, but there's this hesitancy because they don't want to be liable. They don't want to have a liability in taking on supervisees who have clients, or therapists who have clients, because it's too much liability. And that hurts my heart too, because I want I feel like you need to become a supervisor. Everyone has to have something to, like, be able to support somebody. And don't fear from becoming a supervisor just because of the liability piece. This is what we have liability insurance for. But if you have a model set up for you where you're
Hmm.
able to really dig into every aspect of the therapist's world, and being a therapist and all of their clients, you shouldn't be worried. There shouldn't be
Yeah.
fear there. Yeah.
I have found, and this will be our last little piece because we do need to wrap up, but I have
Yeah.
found that when I have somebody who is having that feeling of, "Ooh, I don't want the liability, it's too scary. I just want to keep myself I just want to
Hmm.
control all those pieces." When I have explored that with them, sometimes what I recognize is that in their supervision, when they were in training, they they recognized that they hid stuff from their supervisor, right?
I've never
And
thought of it that way.
And they just feel like somebody's gonna hide stuff from me, and I don't wanna be responsible for those things. And 99% of the time when I have dug deep into those conversations, it's never anything, like, super bad. Nobody's sleeping with clients that, or
Oh
anything
God,
like that.
good.
It's simple things like, they knew that this client that they were really struggling with this client, but they didn't want their supervisor to think that they were a terrible therapist, so they just didn't bring it up in their supervision in the timing that they should have, right?
Mm,
Or that they were behind on their notes, so they got their supervisor talking about other things, so they didn't ask them
mhm,
about their notes so they could catch up
mhm.
before their supervisor noticed.
Sure.
Like, just simple human
Yeah,
things
yeah,
because of that power differential, because of the fear-based system that we live in, like, it's all like, normal. But once I've
yeah,
probed into
yeah,
that and been like, "Yeah, people are human and they're
yeah,
gonna do that." So what
yeah,
can you do to prep for it? What can you do to make sure that you are asking the questions? How can you have your eyes on the things so that you
yeah.
can do that? And what kind of an environment can you instill where your supervisee doesn't have to be afraid to come in to tell you something?
That's
Because
true. I have
that's
talked
that
about that.
internal work that if we spent time
Yes.
really developing that at the beginning of a supervisor's training, like,
Yeah.
they could feel confident about the environment they're engaging that supervisee in, that that
Mhm.
supervisee could come in and say, "Gosh, I'm 4 days behind, and I
Right.
just can't seem to catch up," and they
Yep.
would know that it was a safe space to come in and tell you that. right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's the
No,
work
I
we need
love
to be
that.
developing in addition
Right.
to, of
Yes.
course, we want them to be on time with their notes. Of course, we want them to
Yeah.
bring
Well,
up the
yeah.
hard clients because that's the learning part that they're in. But we penalize those spaces in
Yeah.
school. We penalize those places in society.
Yeah.
It's a hard give. So
Yeah.
anyway,
No,
my little
that's
two
really
cents on
great.
that note.
No, that's great. That's great. Great stuff. I appreciate that perspective too. And it's, yeah, it's, that's, yeah. No other comments. I mean, I think that's beautifully said. Yep.
Yep. Well, thank you
Yep.
so much for your time. I feel
Of
like we
course.
could talk for hours and hours. And even
Yeah.
this time, I'm like, oh, goodness, I didn't even keep track of the time today. Whoops. So it's a long episode for all those people who are listening out there.
Yay.
Well, yay for that. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And
Absolutely.
thank you,
Thank you for
everybody
having me.
else, for joining us today. I hope you took away some good things, and we'll see you all next
Mhm.
time.
This has been Supervision Smorgasbord with Dr. Tara Sanderson. Please like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can find us at drtarasanderson.com/podcast and on all social media at Dr. Tara Sanderson. Thank you, and we will see you next time.